When I first met Dad, it was a very wonderful surprise. This big, tall, handsome fellow came in our house, and I couldn't believe that he wanted to date me. But he had called on the phone. I guess we had seen each other at the sunset service at Garden Park Ward, and I remember fairly smiling at someone so tall and nice and handsome. And he called me soon after that, but I had left for Mexico. I'd spent a month down there. And he called several times, and Mother didn't know who he was. He didn't tell her who he was. But when he called, he said, well, I've got the state president's, he knows me. He was back in Washington with me, and he knows me, and other gentlemen in the ward he knew. And I said, oh, I'm not going to call them. Just come on up and we'll meet. So when I opened that door, it was the surprise of my life. And he was been the most important person in my life ever since. And then when Melvin appeared on the doorstep, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And we've had a marvelous life. He's a great, fine man who's honored his priesthood and who loves the gospel. Melvin was a hyperactive child. That was what the pediatrician called him back east. And she was a very good pediatrician, and she said, but they usually are very successful people because they do a lot of things. So that was encouraging. We were hoping that we could find out why Mel didn't grow. And we took him around to different places, John Hopkins and NIH and the private doctors. And finally, when we came out here and put him in the children's hospital, they changed the diagnosis on him and found out that he didn't need to be kept in traction anymore like he had back east. And he's been a go-getter all his life. He's got good ideas, and I've appreciated him because he set the right example for the children, the other children in the family. And we had so much fun rock hunting because of Mel and many other things. And he was always reaching for the stars, he didn't believe that he couldn't do anything. He just felt like he could do the world. And we've just enjoyed him. He's a very special person with a very special spirit about him. And I wonder to this day how he's accomplished all he has with his limitations. And he has a wonderful wife, Melissa, who I think Heavenly Father sent to him. But I prayed a lot about Melvin from time to time. Sometimes I prayed all night. And he has let me know that Melvin is a really special, tops person, and that I was privileged to be his mother. Well, Jim was a very, very good baby. He would go to sleep when you wanted him to. He was always hungry, and he was just a gentle person. And while they were little, I used to dress them alike, and they looked like twins. Then, of course, Jimmy started growing a lot more, and Melvin didn't grow. And so pretty soon Jimmy passed him up. But I don't think Jimmy realized that he passed him up because Melvin was still in charge. And he let him, even until he went on his mission. When Melvin went on his mission, Jimmy was wanting to go too, just because they'd done so many things together. We tried to find out if that was possible, and it wasn't. But he did go the next year, and he's a very personable person. Very gentle and kind and understanding, and he was a very good student. He didn't need all the help that Melvin did. He was a good missionary. Again, he's very humble, and today I think he's grown into a wonderful man and is a wonderful father for his 4 daughters. He married a lovely, wonderful woman, Susie Acey, and he has been a wonderful member of our family. David was our Goldie boy. He was born with his legs tucked under him, so the doctor, the pediatrician, she had to do exercises on his legs so that they would straighten out. And we used to make it a fun thing. We used to sing the Yellow Rose of Texas while we pushed on one side of his leg and pushed on the other. And it became a fun thing to do. And finally, the rest of the family wanted to do it too. But he was called our Goldie boy. He started out with dark hair. In a couple of months, it had gone red. And in a couple of months, it had gone blonde. And he had blonde curls, and he was a jovial kid. He was always into things. He'd climb fences, pulled him off the freeway up there just before it was opened. And a policeman was driving on there, and I got to him first. I got to David first, and he said, "You've got to keep that child off the street. You won't have a child anymore." And I said, "But I don't know what to do. He climbed the fence. And I couldn't catch him." And he says, "Well, you better. You won't have a child." He warned him. And so another time he jumped off the ping pong table and slid up the fatty part of his chin. We took him over to the hospital to have him stitches put in, and he hadn't cried and it hadn't bled, but it was wide open. And just as they wrapped him in a sheet in the stroller, and just as he was ready to be stitched, they brought a man in that they had shot. The police had shot, and so everything had to wait until after this man was taken care of, and David was howling all the time. But anyway, he survived all that. He used to like to work. He worked very hard with the man next door, in back of us, Mr. Gray. It was a Scotsman, and he'd take him to work every morning around his yard, and David always liked to work. And then when we moved out to Farmington, he went with Uncle Art and his partner, made the rounds before he would go to kindergarten in the afternoon. And then when he moved up here, I was looking for a man that I could trust, that he could work with. I picked out Jen Maine's father. Unfortunately, he developed cancer. In 6 weeks, he was gone. But when he was in junior high, grade school first, he sold donuts for the donut company down there. They used to ask the little boys to sell the donuts for him. And he just loved earning that money. And he has loved working ever since. I can always depend on him. When he went through football, he did well in sports. He lettered and was and he just thrived on football. Got his account where he said he would sacrifice his body any time to win. And that was it. But now he has his children and his wife, a lovely home that he built, practically himself, and 4 lovely children, with his first one going, actually going off to college with a good scholarship. She's going back to BYU. Emily is a wonderful wife. She's very prudent, very careful. She came from a big family. Her heritage is Armenian, and she doesn't look Armenian like the rest of her family. She was always a blonde. But what a lovely person she is. I dearly love her. Carol Ann Farr was our only girl, and we waited through 3 boys to have Carol. And she was the cutest thing, and I guess we spoiled her. But oh, what fun we had. And the boys cut off her curls when she was young, and that was the cardinal sin. Oh, for them to do that was just the most horrible thing. But she grew up to be a lovely girl. She was a very talented ballet dancer, and she was on the pep club at Skyline, was an officer there, and then she became a Lonnie Shea, which meant a little nest of Ingles, and that was the drill team, and she's very talented. Then she went to BYU and was on the drill team down there, Cougarette. And when she met David's friend, Jerry was on the same mission as David, and they were talking one time, and she asked him if he knew David Farr. And he said, oh, yes. They were good friends. And David had picked Jerry out to introduce Carol to after his mission, but she already met him. And they have a lovely family. Well, Jerry is a very wonderful person. He is very even-tempered, and he doesn't seem to ever get mad. I imagine he does, like everybody else, but he's very content, and he thinks the world of Carol, and I think she made a very good choice in choosing Jerry. I know he's always treated me with great respect. Now there's Kevin, was the oldest boy, and he's living in our basement right now with his wife while he goes to school, and he's been doing research up at the university, and quite a few of the people up there have said, why don't you go to medical school? So he may apply for that next fall because his grades are top and he's doing really well. Mary Beth, his wife, works hard, and she's a darling girl. John and Angie. John was a very good boy for many years. He just was very handsome. When he was a baby, Grandfather Bennett wouldn't let him go. He'd hold him. We lived there for 6 weeks or 3 months, I guess it was, while Melvin was in the hospital. Melvin, our son Melvin. But John was the baby, and Grandfather, his life was just like a light was shining at that time if he could play and hold that baby. And Mother said, oh, what a good-looking baby. And ever since, John has had the advantage of dimples, and this, unfortunately, the teachers at school gave in. They wouldn't discipline him the way when he needed it. He'd smile those dimples at them, and their hearts would melt. And so but he grew up anyway. In spite of that, he went on a mission, and he served the people of El Paso, Texas, and he came home. And Angie, I didn't want him to marry Angie. I just felt like they weren't fit for each other. And that was where the biggest mistake of even thinking that. because Angie is a tremendous girl. She's had a wonderful education. She's raised her family of two girls and 3 boys.
3 boys and 4 girls.
Huh?
3 boys, 4 girls.
Okay. I forgot the twins. That's his second family. And forgot Winston. But anyway, she is a lovely person. She's very resourceful. She's thorough what she does. She runs a wonderful home for that size family. And we love her so very much. And I always apologize to her for even thinking that she shouldn't marry. I never could have picked out anyone as good as she is for John. Danny was our last, and the only one born in Salt Lake. And he was a go-getter from the first time he was a little guy. He knew who the ladies were in the ward that would give him a cookie. And after school, every night, he'd go to a different house and get one to eat on the way home. And he was always full of ideas. And he's very resourceful today. But as a child, I never knew quite what he was going to do. One time, he came home with these lovely bouquet of tulips. And I said, "Where did you get those?" And his friend, Ari, his friend that was with him said, "Oh, he took the lady's tulips over there." So I marched him right over there. And she said, "Well, you asked if you could take the tulips, and I told you you could not. Why did you take them?" And he said, "To put on my kitten's grave." And she felt bad, and I felt bad. But we knew we had done the right thing, because he mustn't go pick people's tulips. But he's always had lots of ideas and skills. And he joined the older brothers in basketball. And because he always played basketball with them, he became very good. And he was all-state basketball player, and he was the highest point man in the 4A tournament. And he's always surprised us with his book hit he came out with Dick Van Dyke and many other projects that he's done. And he's been able to provide well for his family. And he has 2 boys and a little girl, Lily, whose birthday is tomorrow. She'll be 3. And it's a lovely family. Stephanie, we first met Stephanie when she came to the ward. The daddy was bishop of the singles ward. And I guess Dan had met her out there, and they had talked, when I say out there, at the community college. And they had talked together, and he talked her into coming. So she did, and they went together 3 years before, and Dan, she thought Dan was her boyfriend, but it took him 3 years to ask her to marry him. And she is a lovely person. I have been so blessed with lovely daughter-in-laws who are very kind and sweet to me, and I love them very much. I think that I've always had a testimony. When I was about 4 years old, my Uncle Thane had 2 cars. He was a traveling salesman, and he would come and pick up our grandmother that lived at our house, Ellen K. Milner. And he'd take her down to where she used to live in Wellington and take us with him. And one time we were down there, and I wanted to go in the car with my mother and father and grandma, and little brother. He was about 2. And there was somebody else was in the car. I think their youngest boy was Dick. As we drove along, the older boy, Bill, was driving the car, and all of us teenagers, and I was just a 4, it wasn't me. I wasn't a teenager, but all of a sudden, he stopped the car and said, "Everybody out." And he'd run off the edge of the road, and the river, the swift river, was raging below. And he said, "Be careful getting out." And we all got out. But I remember feeling the feeling I had at that time of wanting to go so in with my parents. And I felt that was the first testimony I ever had in my life. And we felt like Heavenly Father watched over us, because that whole car could have turned over into that river and all of us been killed. And that was, and Grandma was my bed partner. She would tell me stories. She was old and couldn't get around very much, but she'd tell me faith-promoting stories. And she would tell me about her time when she was a little girl, and she was a great nurse, and she was able to help many people. And when she passed away, they had many, many stories about how she saved people from this and that and was able to heal them, and that's what her patriarchal blessing had told her. So I felt that my testimony grew. And then when I was a teenager, we had a wonderful fireside. And we would go to fireside. There was a whole room full of college kids and high school kids there in different people's homes. But we had Oscar Hunter, who came back from the war with a strong testimony. And he would teach us to be missionaries. We used to do a little drama, the lady on the doorstep and a missionary on the doorstep, trying to get in. But through my life, prayer has always been. I remember when my dad took me over to get my patriarchal blessing. I was about 10, and he took me over there to Gaskell Romney's house. He was the father of George Romney and of grandfather of Mitt Romney. He was our stake patriarch. And I remember the lovely patriarchal blessing he gave me. And I had it while I was quite young, but it was always a guide in my life. And then my parents. I had marvelous parents. Mother had to discipline us and take care of us most of the time because Daddy was traveling for the church all the time. And he had many faith-promoting stories, and there's a lot written about him. I've got it as a lot that how his life was saved during the First World War. I've got that story in your books I'm making for you. But Heavenly Father blessed him, and they blessed my mother. And my mother and father were very strong in the church. And so that I just knew that I loved the church, and I loved my Father in heaven. And I just knew that all my life. So I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to have that guidance.